The Vanishing Hour. The first thing I noticed was the silence, not the kind that settles after midnight in a small town, but the heavy, suffocating kind that feels manufactured, engineered almost, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Stood in the doorway of my sister's apartment, the key still dangling from my hand, staring into the darkness that swallowed the familiar room whole. Emily should have been here. Her car was parked outside, her shoes by the mat, her jacket slung over the back of the couch. Everything was in its rightful place except her. She was gone. A half-drunk glass of water sat on the coffee table, faint condensation still sliding down the sides. Her phone buzzed faintly from the kitchen counter, screen cracked but glowing with unanswered notifications. Emily would never leave her phone behind. She was 27, tied to it like a lifeline, and yet it lay abandoned, whispering like a discarded clue. I tried to tell myself I wasn't panicking, that maybe she had stepped out for a walk, gone to clear her head after another argument with Mum, or lost track of time at a neighbor's flat. But my stomach twisted with the truth. I didn't want to admit Emily didn't vanish. Someone had taken her, or something had happened in the 1 hour between her last call to me and my arrival here, the vanishing hour. 42 p.m. That was when she'd called, her voice tight with something I couldn't place. Fear, excitement. She told me she had found something I needed to see for myself. Her tone was urgent, clipped, like she couldn't risk saying it aloud. "Come now," she had whispered. "Before it's too late." By 8:50 I was standing in her empty apartment, the air thick and still, as though whatever had happened here had sucked the oxygen out of the walls. I moved through the room slowly, the way I had back when I was a detective walking through crime scenes, my eyes dragging over details, my brain cataloging every fragment that felt off. A faint smell of burnt paper hung in the air. The bin under her desk was stuffed with shredded documents, edges singed, as though she'd tried to destroy something quickly. The desk drawer was locked. I tugged at it, felt resistance, then gave up. On the floor nearby lay a single Polaroid photograph, face down. My pulse quickened as I bent to pick it up. Emily. Standing in front of a building I didn't recognize, her eyes wide, her expression unreadable. But there was something strange in the background, just over her shoulder, blurred, like a shadow too defined to be accidental. A figure, watching. I shoved the photo into my pocket, heart hammering louder with each second of silence. The clock on her wall ticked 9:03, less than 90 minutes since her call, and already the trail felt cold. I'd seen enough cases to know the first hours mattered most, and I was losing them with every tick of that clock. Her laptop sat open on the desk, screen still glowing. Most files were locked, but a single window remained, an email draft, unsent. My name in the recipient bar, no words in the body, just an attachment icon, grayed out as though deleted before sending. The burn mark on the bin, the shredded paper, the unfinished message. She had tried to get something to me, and someone had stopped her. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over the option to call the police. But I hesitated. After I left the force, I'd made enemies. My resignation wasn't clean, and I wasn't sure I could trust the same department that had pushed me out. If Emily had stumbled onto something dangerous, reporting it too soon might bury it deeper. A sound broke through the silence, not loud, but sharp. The creak of floorboards from the hall outside. My breath caught, every muscle stiffening. I killed the laptop screen with a tap, letting the apartment sink back into shadows, my ears strained. Another step. Someone was out there. I reached for the heavy glass on the table, gripping it like a weapon, my body angled toward the door. The handle twitched, just slightly, as though whoever was on the other side was debating whether to enter. And then, silence. Again, long, drawn-out silence that stretched until my pulse roared in my ears. I forced myself forward, yanked the door open. The hallway was empty. No footsteps retreating, no shadows slipping away, only the lingering trace of something sharp in the air, cigarette smoke, faint but recent. Emily didn't smoke. But one man I knew did. Detective Jonathan Hale, my former partner. The same man who'd betrayed me 5 years ago, who had lied on the stand and cost me my badge, and now his cigarette smoke clung to my sister's empty apartment. The smoke clung to me long after I left Emily's apartment, trailing me like a phantom reminder of Jonathan Hale. I hadn't seen him in years, but his presence was unmistakable, branded into my memory with every betrayal he carved into my career. If his cigarette had burned here tonight, it meant he knew something, or worse, he had taken her. The night pressed in as I walked to my car, every shadow stretching too long, every sound sharpened by paranoia. London streets were alive with 1,000 secrets, but tonight they all whispered the same word: gone. Emily was out there somewhere, in the hands of someone who had already erased her traces too neatly. I slid into the driver's seat and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Hollow eyes, unshaven jaw. A face that once belonged to a detective, now reduced to the weary features of a man who had quit chasing ghosts. Except this ghost had my sister's face, and quitting wasn't an option. I opened the Polaroid again, under the dim glow of the dashboard light. The building in the background was tall, brutalist, its windows boarded on the lower floors. Familiar, but distant, like a place from another life. And that shadowy figure behind her, indistinct, but standing too close, too deliberate, watching her, Hale's smoke, Hale's methods, my sister's disappearance, threads weaving together, into a picture I didn't want to see. I drove aimlessly at first, circling through the city, mind racing. My instincts screamed at me to hunt him down, confront him, drag the truth from his throat. But instinct without evidence was suicide. And Jonathan Hale was a man who lived in shadows. He had the badge, he had the connections, and I had nothing but the wreckage of a past case that had left me branded as unreliable, unstable, a man who cracked under pressure. But there was something Hale didn't know. He might still see me as the disgraced ex-detective, but I had learned, in these years outside the force, learned how to move quietly, unnoticed, learned how to trust patterns, not people, and I knew the first step was always the same: follow the trail others missed. I returned to Emily's apartment just before midnight, slipping through the rear entrance to avoid drawing eyes. I didn't switch on the lights. Instead, I searched, the place with the patience of an intruder, tracing her last movements, the glass of water, the shredded papers, the email draft. My gaze kept returning to the locked drawer in her desk. It took me minutes to force it open with the tip of a screwdriver. Inside, a neat stack of envelopes, each labeled in her sharp handwriting. Receipts, bank statements, newspaper clippings, and at the bottom, an unmarked file, thicker than the rest. I flipped it open. Photographs, grainy and dark. Emily outside buildings, faces half lit in street lamps, people caught in surveillance-like frames. My heart thudded as I recognized one of them, Jonathan Hale. She had been following him. Every instinct I had screamed at me to stop, to walk away before I uncovered something that could not be unseen. But blood is louder than fear. I kept turning, pages until I found the last photo, taken only days ago, judging by the timestamp scrawled on the back. Hale, exiting that same brutalist building I had noticed in her Polaroid. A match, and then, beneath the photographs, a single torn page of handwritten notes. He meets them on Thursdays, always the same hour. Not police business, something bigger. If you're reading this, don't trust anyone. My stomach twisted. Tomorrow was Thursday. I stuffed the file into my bag, heart pounding. Emily had been chasing something connected to Hale, something he couldn't allow her to expose. That building was the key. If she had gone there, and I believed she had, it meant she walked straight into the same shadows that had already destroyed my life once before. The night deepened into silence again, broken only by the ticking of Emily's wall clock. Every second was a warning. Time was bleeding away. I barely slept. By dawn, the city was washed in gray, and I was already parked across from the brutalist building. Its facade loomed like a forgotten monument, windows blind, doors sealed with chains that looked older than the bricks. It had once been a records office for the council, if my memory served. Abandoned now. Yet as the hours crawled toward noon, movement stirred. A dark sedan pulled up. Two men stepped out, their suits too sharp, their eyes scanning the street with predatory calm. They weren't police, they weren't bureaucrats, they were something else. And then Hale emerged from the shadows of the doorway, cigarette glowing faintly in the drizzle. He greeted the men with a curt nod, ushered them inside. My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles blanched. Emily had followed him here. Whatever he was tangled in, she had walked into the heart of it. The Polaroid burned in my pocket. Her face, that building, that shadow behind her. I knew then, with the kind of certainty that shatters denial, Emily hadn't simply disappeared. She had been taken because she saw too much, and if I wanted her back, I would have to step inside the very building where Jonathan Hale had once destroyed me, and where he might now be keeping her. The rain followed me as I crossed the street, its steady drizzle soaking through my coat, masking the sound of my footsteps. The building loomed ahead like a tomb, concrete scarred by years of neglect. Windows on the upper floors were jagged, with broken glass, their edges glinting faintly in the gray light. The chained front entrance whispered of abandonment, but I knew better. Jonathan Hale hadn't brought men here for nostalgia. I slipped down the alley to the side, scanning for another way in. Rust clung to every lock, but rust can be broken. Behind a row of overflowing bins, I found a service door with hinges warped from years of disuse. It gave after a few determined shoves, protesting with a shriek that echoed into the hollow corridors beyond. The air inside was damp, heavy with the smell of mildew and dust. My torch cut through the darkness in thin beams, revealing flaking paint, water stains spreading across ceilings, and walls scribbled with graffiti that looked more like warnings than art. Every sound magnified, the drip of water from a broken pipe, the crunch of glass under my boots, the thunder of my own pulse. I moved carefully, my instincts sharpened from years of crime scenes, even if I no longer carried a badge. The first floor was barren, a carcass of collapsed furniture and empty filing cabinets. But the second floor hummed faintly. Electricity. Someone had wired power through this place, though it had no reason to live. The hum guided me down the corridor, past doors with numbers half faded, until I reached one that wasn't like the others. Newer lock. Scratches around the handle, as if tested often. I pressed my ear to it, hearing nothing but the faint thrum of machines. Inside was a room that didn't belong to the building's decay. Banks of monitors glowed faintly, showing feeds from cameras placed across the city. Streets, car parks, even a train platform I recognized. Surveillance, not council, not police. Something private, something hidden. And there, on the desk, a folder marked in thick black ink, E. Cartwright, my sister's name. My hand shook as I reached for it. Inside were photographs. Emily walking home from work. Emily at the cafe where she read on Sundays. Emily unlocking her apartment door. Stamped dates trailed across the bottom of each, as recent as 2 days ago. She had been watched, tracked, cataloged like prey. Beneath the photos, a single sheet of paper bore a list of times and addresses. Meetings, surveillance points. And at the bottom, one line scrawled hastily in red pen. Asset compromised. Secure immediately. A sound cut through my thoughts, a door creaking open down the hall. Footsteps. I killed the torch and pressed into the corner, listening as voices drifted closer. Hale's voice graveled, unmistakable. She was cleverer than I thought. I told you to move her sooner. Another voice, low and measured. She's contained. But her brother, he's been sniffing around. We saw him outside. My stomach turned cold. They knew I was here. I slipped back into the hall, footsteps featherlight, moving in the opposite direction. The walls seemed to lean in tighter, the corridor longer than I remembered. I forced myself to breathe slow, steady, ignoring the urge to sprint. Sprinting made noise. Noise meant discovery. At the stairwell I froze, Another figure stood blocking the exit below, the glow of a phone screen lighting his face. He hadn't seen me yet, but he would. I turned and climbed instead, higher into the building's hollow shell. The third floor sagged with age, ceilings bowed, but it gave me cover. I slipped into an office with blinds still half intact and crouched beneath the window. The rain outside was heavier now, hammering the glass, covering the sound of my breath. I needed to think. Emily was alive, that much the file suggested. Contained. But where? Here, in this building, or moved elsewhere? Hale's words circled, like vultures. She was cleverer than I thought. He hadn't expected her to follow him to gather evidence, and if she had gathered enough, then whatever she discovered was big enough to kill for. My hand brushed something beneath the desk. A small metal box taped to the underside. I pried it free and flipped it open. A drive, black, unmarked, the kind of thing people risked lives to hide. Another noise snapped me back, this time closer. A floorboard groaned just outside the office door. Shadows moved beneath the crack, pausing, waiting. I gripped the drive in my palm, my other hand tight on the torch, ready to swing it as a weapon if I had to. The handle rattled, but instead of bursting open, the footsteps retreated. Hale's voice again, faint down the hall. "Search every floor. He won't get far." Tatua game had shifted. They weren't speculating anymore. They knew I was inside. I slipped to the window, pried it open against rusted hinges. The drop to the alley below was 2 stories, not fatal if I landed right. My chest burned with the risk, but staying meant capture. With the drive clenched tight, I climbed onto the sill, the rain slick beneath my boots, the wind knifing against my face. For one suspended heartbeat, I looked back at the room, the monitors glowing, the folder stamped with my sister's name, the shadows moving closer, and then I jumped. The impact tore through my knees, sent pain shooting up my spine, but I rolled into the wet gravel and forced myself to my feet. The building loomed above me, its windows lit faintly by the machinery of secrets, and behind them Jonathan Hale was hunting me. But now, I had something he didn't know I'd taken. A drive. A clue, a bargaining chip, and maybe, just maybe, the key to finding Emily before the vanishing hour closed for good. I didn't stop running until the city swallowed me. The drizzle became sheets of rain, hammering the pavement, erasing footprints, cloaking me in its noise. I ducked into an all-night cafe off the high street, the kind that smelled of burnt coffee and disinfectant, and collapsed into the back booth with the drive clutched in my fist. The place was empty except for a weary barista who barely looked up. Perfect. My laptop flickered to life, the glow harsh against the storm outside. I slid the drive into the port with fingers that trembled from more than the cold. The screen blinked, hesitated, then unfolded a labyrinth of encrypted files. Someone had buried these deep, but not deep enough for someone who knew where to dig. I worked through layer after layer, the cafe clock ticking past 2 a.m., as rain pounded harder, drowning the city in static, and then the walls cracked open. Video. Files. The first showed a grainy feed of a man tied to a chair in a room with concrete walls. His face was battered, his clothes soaked in blood. A voice off camera questioned him, the words muffled but relentless. He gave names, addresses, secrets. The screen cut to black before his body went still. The next file was sharper, more recent. A warehouse. Dozens of crates, men in suits moving them under Hale's watchful eye. But the crates weren't filled with drugs or weapons. They were filled with documents, classified files stamped with government seals, marked restricted access, and then came the video that turned my blood to ice. Emily. She was seated at a metal table, her wrists bound, her hair disheveled, a camera fixed on her face. She looked exhausted but defiant, eyes flashing at someone behind the lens. She spoke. No sound, only silent footage. But her lips formed words I recognized. Don't trust them. The timestamp was yesterday. She was alive. I slammed the laptop shut, my chest heaving. The drive wasn't just evidence. It was dynamite, capable of tearing down men like Hale and the entire network around him. But dynamite in the wrong hands was worthless. I needed allies. Someone outside this rotten web. Someone clean. Except clean didn't exist in my world anymore. The rain eased by the time I left the cafe, but paranoia clung to me like smoke. Every reflection in shop windows looked like a tale. Every slow-moving car felt deliberate. Hale would already know something was missing. He'd hunt me until I gave it back, or until I stopped breathing. I checked into a cheap hotel under a false name, locked the door, and barricaded it with a chair. My mind spun too fast for sleep. Instead, I watched Emily's video again and again, memorizing every detail. The chipped paint on the walls behind her, the faint hum of machinery I thought I could almost hear, even through the silence. By dawn, exhaustion dragged me under. But it wasn't rest. It was a blur of dreams. Emily calling my name from dark corridors, Hale's cigarette glowing like a lighthouse in fog, a clock ticking louder and louder until it shattered. I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing. A number I didn't recognize, hesitated before answering. But silence can be worse than voices. I pressed it to my ear. Breathing. Steady. Deliberate. Then a voice, low and sharp. "You have something that belongs to us." My veins turned to ice. I didn't respond. The voice continued. "Bring it tonight. The building. Midnight. Or she dies." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my pulse thundering in my ears. They knew I had the drive. They had Emily. And they were setting the terms, but terms cut both ways. By late afternoon, I had traced the faint details from the video. Those walls, that paint, the industrial hum. I cross-referenced old council records, building permits, anything I could dig up. One location surfaced, an abandoned power substation on the city's outskirts. The same architectural bones as the place in Emily's video. That was where they were holding her, and that was where I'd go. But walking in blind would be suicide. I needed leverage. I opened the drive again, copying key files to a second device, one I could hide away. If I didn't make it out, someone else had to see the truth. Hale's operation wasn't just corruption. It was treason, selling state secrets to faceless men in dark suits. As the sky bruised into twilight, I drove to the edge of the city, the roads slick with rain. My mind raced between plans, each more reckless than the last. Emily was alive, but maybe not for long. Midnight was their deadline. My deadline. The vanishing hour, closing in again. I parked a mile from the substation, concealed the backup drive, beneath a loose stone near the roadside. Insurance if I failed. The air here was colder, quieter, heavy with the smell of metal and rain-soaked earth. From the ridge I saw it, the substation's skeletal towers jutting into the storm clouds, lights glowing faintly inside the cracked windows. Shadows moved, in and out, men on patrol. Somewhere inside those walls, Emily was waiting. Somewhere inside, Hale was smoking his cigarette, thinking he had already won. But the drive was mine, and I was coming for her. The storm broke as I descended the hill, rain slashing sideways, lightning carving the sky. My coat clung to me like a shroud, my pulse quickening with each step closer to the lion's den. I reached the chain-link fence, cut through with wire I'd stashed in my coat, and slipped inside. And then from the corner of my eye I caught movement. A figure at the fence line watching me. Not one of Hale's men. Emily. She stood there, soaked to the bone, eyes wide, lips parted as if to scream. But no sound came. I froze, disbelief tearing through me. She wasn't inside. She was here. Free. But if she was free, then who was inside that building? Or a heartbeat. I couldn't move. The rain lashed across the fence, lightning bleaching Emily's face into something spectral. She stood a dozen paces away, eyes darting, urging me not to speak, not to draw attention. My chest clenched at the sight of her, alive, breathing, yet wrong somehow. Her wrists bore faint bruises, the imprint of restraints. Her clothes clung in tatters. She looked like the woman in the video, and yet not. There was no defiance in her eyes now, Only terror. I started toward her, but she raised a trembling hand, shaking her head violently. My instincts screamed. Something was off, and then the floodlights blazed across the yard, painting us in white fire. Voices erupted from the substation, shouts cutting through the storm. Men poured out, rifles slung, movements precise. At their head, Jonathan Hale stepped into the downpour, cigarette glowing in defiance of the rain. He looked older, lines carved deeper into his face, but the smile was the same, the one that always preceded betrayal. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. His men swarmed, boxing me in, herding me and Emily both toward the gaping mouth of the substation. Inside, the air was heavy with ozone and oil, machines groaning faintly from forgotten days. Lightning strobed through shattered windows as Hale circled us like a predator. "You never learned when to let go," he rasped, the cigarette ember flaring. "Always chasing ghosts, and here you are again." Emily's fingers dug into my arm, but her eyes pleaded with me. "Don't trust what you see." Hale motioned, and one of his men dragged forward a chair. He wanted a stage, a performance. My gut twisted. I'd seen this before, the way he broke people, the way he'd broken me, and then they brought her in. Another Emily. Bound, gagged, hair plastered to her face. Her eyes locked onto mine, wild with recognition, desperate, alive. The world tilted. Two Emilys. One standing beside me, trembling. One tied to the chair, fighting restraints. Hale's grin deepened as he watched the confusion tear through me. "You see the problem, don't you?" My pulse roared. My mind grasped at answers, twins, doubles, tricks. But the truth hit colder than the rain. One of them wasn't my sister. One of them was bait, the Emily beside me whispered, almost too faint to hear. "It's me. Don't listen to them." Her nails dug deeper, frantic. The bound Emily shook her head violently, eyes blazing with desperation. Tears mixed with rain, and sweat as she tried to scream through the gag. Hale leaned close, smoke curling from his lips. "One truth, one lie. You get to choose." The storm outside battered the roof, each thunderclap a countdown. My breath came in ragged gulps. If I chose wrong, my sister was gone forever. My mind clawed through the files, the videos, the photographs. Emily in surveillance stills, Emily leaving notes, Emily's handwritten warning. "Don't trust anyone." That was it. The Emily beside me had spoken aloud, had whispered reassurance. But in the video, she hadn't used sound, only mouthed words, careful, silent, because she knew the cameras had audio, because she knew not to give them her voice. The bound Emily, silent but screaming with her eyes, that was her. I moved without thinking. My fist drove into the jaw of the one closest guard. My free hand wrenched his weapon, the shock of recoil exploding as I fired toward the lights. The substation plunged into chaos, shadows jerking wild. Hale roared orders, his cigarette glowing like a beacon in the dark. I lunged for the chair, cutting Emily's bonds with the guard's own blade. She gasped as the gag slipped, her voice raw but alive. "It's me! It's me!" The other Emily screamed, shrill, inhuman, too perfect. Her features flickered in the strobe of lightning, an overlay, a mask of flesh not entirely hers, a double crafted to deceive. She lunged, feral, at both of us, but the chaos broke her illusion. Her face rippled, synthetic edges tearing at the seams. Not Emily, not human. Something engineered to be her shadow. Hale's empire wasn't just secrets and surveillance. It was identity itself. Stolen, cloned, repurposed. Emily had uncovered it. That was why she had to vanish. Gunfire tore the air. I dragged my sister through the labyrinth of machinery, every step a battle. The storm outside became our cover, rain swallowing the cracks of bullets as we burst through a side door. The night consumed us, the towers of the substation shrinking behind. We didn't stop until the city lights flickered ahead. Only then did Emily collapse against a wall, shaking, sobbing. Real. She pressed her forehead to mine. "They'll never stop." I held her tighter, the weight of the drive in my pocket a reminder. Hale wasn't finished. His network ran deeper than I could imagine. But Emily was alive. For now, that was everything. Behind us, thunder rolled like the growl of a wounded beast. Hale had lost this round, but the storm he commanded was far from over. And as the first blue lights of sirens flickered distantly on the horizon, I realized something that chilled me more than the rain. The vanishing hour hadn't ended. It had only just begun.